Hello, I am Joel McLeod, and welcome to the Nanofiber. Before the summer break, our last episode was with Nathaniel Arfin of the New Leaf Liberals. The disappointing results from February's provincial election have led many Ontario Liberals to consider replacing their leader, Bonnie Crombie, as a first step in rebuilding the party as a force in Ontario politics. This has sparked a debate within the Ontario Liberal Party as Bonnie Crombie isn't backing down from her position as party leader and vows to remain in place to take on Doug Ford in the next general election. To say a small-scale civil war has broken out in the Ontario Liberal Party is an understatement. This is often the case in the Liberal Party, where anything less than victory will lead to infighting and calls for resignations. Usually, it takes a strong leader to quell these uprisings. Will Bonnie Crombie be the one to put these naysayers down and rebuild the party into the once mighty Big Red Machine? Well, this weekend at the Ontario Liberal Party AGM, she'll have the chance. As per their constitution rules, after a general election, a leader must go before the membership for a leadership review. If she gains 50% plus one, she will remain as the leader. With stakes this high, it's no wonder Bonnie has been making the rounds over the summer. At the same time, former Ontario leadership contender Nathaniel Arfin Smith is openly challenging her as leader, calling for a no vote to trigger another leadership race. All of this has resulted in a plethora of curiosity about what the future of the Ontario Liberal Party will be. So as we head into the Ontario Liberal AGM weekend, I've invited back to the podcast Sabrina Nanji, founder and reporter of the QP Observer, providing the inside scoop on all Queen's Park-related news and politics. Like most observers of Ontario politics, Sabrina has been following the Ontario Liberal Party's drama over the summer. She joins me today to talk about what's at stake for the Ontario Liberals, not just for Bonnie Crombie, but the party itself, and if it can work to rebuild itself into a fighting force in this province's politics.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Thank you, Sabrina Nanji, for returning once again to the Nanofiber to talk Ontario Liberal Party woes, I think is the way we'll frame this conversation, because it has not been a good summer for the Ontario Liberals. So Sabrina, thank you for coming back to the Nanofiber.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun.
So you took a bit of a summer vacation. I took a bit of a summer vacation. The last episode I did was with Nathaniel Arfin from the New Leaf Liberals to kind of hear at that time they were just getting started with their campaign to push for a leadership review at this September's Ontario Liberal AGM.
Right.
You had an interview with Jeff Lehman, the mayor of Barrie, who was a touted kind of a top tier liberal. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but kind of a high up and coming liberal of note on the provincial scene. And yeah, in that interview, it's a fantastic read. If you get a chance to read it, folks, do it. Subscribe now, because it was kind of like, yeah, I might throw my hat in the ring if there's a liberal leadership race, and it seemed very much the case. And then like 24 hours later, after you published it, he's like, no, I didn't actually mean I was going to vote against Bonnie. And that's kind of what your take, like, what's the summer been? I thought that was an interesting dynamic of that whole, oh yeah, I'd be interested. No, I was just kidding. I didn't actually mean it. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. And like, I will say Jeff's exact words were, well, I'd never say never. Yes, of course I would consider it. But he was very clear, in our interview, he's supporting Bonnie Crombie. He said that they're even personal friends. They have a lot in common, both former mayors. I know Jeff had like been, I guess, flirting with the Liberal leadership in the past.
Hmm.
Had to step aside for family reasons, but he was clear that he doesn't think there is going to be a leadership race. But if there was, then yeah, never say never. He would consider it. And that story got a lot of buzz, obviously, for a lot of reasons. I think, with Nader Smith sort of calling out Bonnie Crombie and doing all but saying he's coming for her job.
Hmm.
That's rubbed a lot of liberals the wrong way. And so even Jeff kind of said, he didn't name names, very diplomatic, but he kind of said, what's going on in the party now. He doesn't really like the infighting. And so I think he did not want to be painted as like a Nader Smith or put into that camp. And I don't think he necessarily walked it back. I think that maybe because so many people were excited, oh, Jeff's running, and just kind of ran with the story. I think maybe he felt like he needed to couch his words a bit.
Hmm.
But that being said, I mean, there is, one politicians, would-be politicians, they do say one thing publicly, and then their supporters and their organizers are doing another thing behind the scenes. And so essentially I had heard that, people who are supporting Jeff Lehman or think that he would be a much better leader than Bonnie Crombie, are actively like wooing delegates and telling people, if you're going to go vote against Bonnie because Jeff's going to run and he's so great because of XYZ. So I wasn't really expecting Jeff to say that, but I had talked to so many people in the party who were like, oh, like, have you heard
Hmm.
from Team Jeff? Here's what Team Jeff's doing. And so I had to ask him. And for the record, I have been asking a lot of people about that. And that is kind of their answer. They're supporting Bonnie. They think she's going to win, but, never say never. And besides Jeff, there's been a couple other names that floated around out there, like Navdeep Bains is one.
Right.
He said he didn't have time to chat with me. Fair enough. It's summer. Everyone's, got a life and they're busy. But I had actually heard that there are people like close to Navdeep Bains, like including his father, who really want him to run for provincial leader. And so, obviously it's a high stakes leadership review coming up next month. And I think that, Bonnie Crombie should not be taking anything for granted.
There's a lot to unpack and all that. I mean, I let's start like I think this all goes back to February. The provincial election that was kind of shocking for a lot of Ontario Liberals. I don't think Ontario Liberals were under the impression that, oh, we're going to go right back into the premier's office in one election, but they were expecting a lot better outcome than what they got. And I think the Ontarians were kind of, I don't know if they were shocked. I mean, they weren't shocked. Nobody's actually, I haven't seen any polling about that expectation. But the fact that Bonnie Crombie didn't win her seat in her home city, and that the only Liberal seat pickup in the 905 was in Ajax, it was kind of a shock that people thought, okay, we should have seen more of a pickup of seats and more of a, Bonnie, you should have at least won your seat. The Liberal leader should at least have a seat in the legislature. And I think that nobody's ever. I find people aren't really talking about that. Like that was just I think a humiliating defeat, and I haven't really seen. I don't know. I find that the Liberal Party's descended into infighting, which is what we all knew was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's your take? Like, what were you hearing from your sources in the Liberal Party about this? Because I've talked to a few liberals myself, and I'd be curious just to swap notes here, from off the record sources.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like you're right about the infighting being inevitable. I feel like the provincial liberals are kind of like the federal conservatives in a way where like they're just willing to knife each other as soon as like the election doesn't go according to plan. But that's just it. Like, I mean, Bonnie Crombie obviously set her expectations very high. Like, I do think she's a star fundraiser compared to, past leaders. She's got that under her belt, and now she's running these social media ads basically saying, the bright spots of the election. They got recognized status, they held on to the seats they had. They grew their caucus by like five, I think. And that's great. Increase the popular vote, their share of the popular vote. I do feel like it's interesting. There was like an Abacus data poll out just this week saying that, while the Ford is at an all-time high, 53%, which is crazy, Marit Stiles and the NDP are at 12%, and she's official opposition. And meanwhile, Bonnie Crombie has and the Liberals have slipped slightly to 27%. And now, like, I feel like the NDP is very lucky, and Marit Stiles, who's also facing a leadership review, is very lucky because just of what our electoral system is and how the map is, and we always talk about the NDP having an efficient vote. So I feel like that can't be discounted. But there were a lot of close races, and I think that, from Liberals I'm talking to, they're obviously going through this with, hindsight is 2020, but they think that, resources should have been deployed in certain
Hmm.
areas. Maybe not sending everyone to St. Paul's, which with Stephanie Smythe was probably going to be a slam dunk. And of course, Mississauga, like, not only did Bonnie Crombie not win her own seat, and I will say the Conservatives really tried their hardest to make sure that didn't happen. I mean, running Patrick Brown's mother-in-law and putting a ton of resources there. There were ministers door knocking. They really tried very hard, but not to win any seats in Mississauga. Where she should have in the 905. We all know it can make or break you. Like
Hmm.
that, I think was probably, one of the bigger upsets that happened. And I do think while the Liberals have a lot to be proud of, some are even saying that they're expecting, this change with Bonnie to happen overnight, and it's not. And I do think she was up against, a snap election, but at the same time, the snap election was kind of like the worst kept secret in Ontario politics. So we
Well,
all knew it was coming,
well, that's the
for
thing.
it to kind of be an excuse. I don't know if it's going to fly with Liberals.
I've heard that said, oh, we didn't know this election was coming. And
Right.
every time I do that, I say I call malarkey on that because you and I have did an episode on that rumor. Like I'm going to say it's almost a year ago that we did it,
Yeah.
probably a little bit more than over a year ago. So to say, oh, we never saw it coming, like no, guys, you know,
She should
ever
have been listening to the 905er. Like, hello.
and reading the Keep You Reporter. Obviously, I mean, what else are you going to do? Um,
Right.
I mean, that mirrors kind of what I've heard from other liberals was that the campaign seemed very disorganized. Resources were not properly distributed, and just it seemed like a kind of like it. Despite the fact that everybody knew for a year the election is probably going to come in February or March
Mhm.
2025, it seemed like they were honestly surprised by it, which again calls into question your judgment on how do you organize.
Right.
I will say this: I've seen a lot more of Bonnie Crombie in the last 2 3 months than I have like in the last 2 years, which is good. But I'm wondering, like, have you seen anything that Bonnie Crombie has actually learned a lesson here? That there's without taking a pun, like a leaf has been turned, a new leaf has been turned over, and that she's campaigned differently. Because I'm not sure she's trying to win over liberals, but I'm not sure she's trying to win over Ontarians. Because you talk to liberals is one thing. If you talk to like everyday people on the street, they do not care about this at all. And I'm wondering, what are you getting a sense that she's learned this lesson?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think right now she's got to win over liberals, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
she's got this AGM coming up and she has been doing that, spending her summer touring, kissing babies, spaghetti dinners, all of that stuff. And I think it is targeting liberals for the most part. I will say any opposition leader has like their work cut out for them right now. When you're just dealing with someone like Doug Ford, who's playing Captain Canada, he's just, politically playing this whole Trump situation very well. And when you've got someone like Mark Carney, it's kind of like they're playing good cop, bad cop. And I think with Mark Carney now kind of putting his elbows down, it's like people really want to see someone like Doug Ford, who maybe has less skin in the game. He's not, across the table from Trump like Carney might be, but he can play this part well. And so I think that's hard for anyone who's not Doug Ford to kind of come in there and try and do the
Right.
same thing. What are you going to do? Disagree with Captain Canada? I don't think so. Um, but I will say that I think Bonnie Crombie has changed a little bit from where I saw her during the campaign. I mean, she seems a lot more humble, first of all. Like she's acknowledging mistakes were made, that, change needs to happen. I would say like what I want to see from her a little bit is for her to be a bit more aggressive. And I've actually actually talked to people who are close to her and said, like, look, you've got Nate Erskine-Smith out here putting out, email blasts, basically ripping Bonnie apart. She should be aggressive and say, like, in the politically correct way, screw this guy. I'm
Hmm.
here, I'm leader, and I'm the only person for the job. And when I talk to people close to Bonnie and say, why isn't she doing that? They're like, well, she doesn't want to be fueling this infighting. She doesn't want to be seen as combative. She's already beat Nate once. And I think some of them even think that he's doing her a favor because he's almost pitched this as like Nate versus Bonnie round two. And we all know how that went, right? And I will say that, Nate's not the only person out there whose name's floating around for a potential replacement. But I think that Bonnie Crombie is trying to be a bit more diplomatic, and maybe show herself as the voice of reason. But I think that the key message I'm hearing from her now is that she's listening and willing to make changes. I mean, whether or not, liberals believe her, whether or not that's actually going to happen, I guess remains to be seen. But I know that that's what she's been putting out there, that, we've learned lessons, there's still more to learn, and we're going to be ready for the next time. So I think that's kind of her pitch to people before the AGM.
I was deep in it, gaming on Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. Unfolding the screen made it twice as big and so immersive, I kinda lost myself. Might have trolled a little too close to the sun. Someone in the chat told me to touch grass, so I took my Z Fold 7 outside and kept playing. Still won, got a tan, and a nice little reset. Powerful processor, realistic graphics, you stay locked in, streak stays alive. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
You mentioned Nate Erskine-Smith, and I wanted to go into that a bit because my impression has been that Nate has really alienated himself in the party. I remember prior to the election, there were a lot of liberals kind of showing buyer's remorse with Bonnie Crombie. They're saying, no, we should be higher in the polls. We should be more ready to take on Doug Ford. If we had Nate, he would have been ready. And a bit of that buyer's remorse. However, I get the sense in the last few months since Nate has started this overt campaign to oust Bonnie, he's kind of muddied the waters a bit, and has kind of made his name a bit of a more of a sore loser than a potential leadership hopeful. Is that what you're getting from your sources as well, or am I reading too much into this?
No, I think a lot of not Nate Kool-Aid drinking liberal.
Right.
They do think that this is sour grapes, and I think that Nate probably didn't do himself any favors when it comes to that impression by sort of calling out the fact that he didn't make it back into the liberal cabinet federally, and so. Yeah, him calling out Bonnie. I mean, obviously, I know a lot. He's actually saying out loud what a lot of liberals are feeling, right? That she's got to hit 66%, otherwise step aside for the leadership review. That there were all these mistakes made during the campaign, and he's very savage in how he's saying it. And I think a lot of liberals that I'm talking with aren't happy with how he's saying it, but what he's saying is, there is some truth to it. I think maybe it's his delivery that's giving Bonnie, the excuse, if I can put it that way, to not really engage or address it, and rather, focus on what the members are going to be asking her about at the convention, or what she's hearing from on maybe behind the scenes more. So I do think that Nate probably hasn't done himself any favors. I know he's still got a lot of support in the party. Like, don't forget, he came runner up in the last leadership race. Bonnie's people were talking about how that leadership race that she ended up winning, it was going to be a first ballot win. They were talking this really big game. It didn't quite go that way. So I feel like when it comes to liberal leaders and potential leaders, like, the way you talk about yourself or hype yourself up can kind of get you in trouble, and it goes both ways. But again, people might not be happy with how Nate is saying it, but what he's saying, I think there's a lot of truth there for a lot of the grits.
The other thing that I think is kind of added some a different aspect to this whole endeavor is fellow podcaster Teresa Lubowitz on her podcast, the Progress Canada, had on Kyla Ronellenfitch, and I'm hoping I pronounced her name right. Kyla, if I did it wrong, email me and correct me. but it was interesting that she's the only one who kind of put out a poll on, what are Ontario Liberals thinking of this at the time, and she made up a list of potential alternative leadership candidates, and I'm not going to go into. I don't want to go into like, who do you think is a better choice? That's too much hyperbole. But what got me was how many people were willing to engage in that conversation. That there definitely seemed to be, because one thing I've heard is like, we can't have a leadership because who would want the job now, right? We're stuck with Bonnie, so we need to get in behind her and support the leader. And Kyla's poll, like, it kind of showed like, no, there might be some alternative names here other than Nate or Bonnie to kind of entertain this idea. Now, whether or not that would actually come out, but like things like Karina Gould, she said that she's not going to, but I thought that was an interesting dynamic. And I'm wondering, going forward, like the Ontario Liberals need to kind of start becoming more relevant to people in their lives politically. And I'm wondering if maybe another leadership race is what we need, just to kind of find somebody who can engage with Ontarians on what's important to them with a bit of authenticity. And I'm wondering, like, is that really feasible, or is it just like a leadership race could just be kind of the death knell of the modern Ontario Liberal Party in the Doug Ford era?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's obviously a lot of benefits to having a leadership contest. I mean, it gets a lot of money for the party too, members signing up. I mean, well, I guess it's free, but like showing up to another convention, tickets, all of that, maybe donations, potential leaders, got to raise money. So I feel like financially, it's a great thing for any political party. Even a policy discussion, right? Like Jeff Lehman, I know, is more of a centrist, kind of like Bonnie Crombie is. And then you've got someone like Nate Erskine-Smith, who's, more on the left-leaning side. So I think policy is also very healthy. I will say, though, that you're right, that the next Liberal leader is going to have their work cut out for them. No seat in the legislature. Bonnie Crombie said she's not going to ask one of her MPPs to step aside. The NDP is still official opposition, even though they're really just becoming, irrelevant. I think that might be some leftover from what's happening with the party federally. But yeah, I mean, I have talked to people who, not necessarily on Team Bonnie, but, seasoned liberals who have been around for many leadership races. And they basically say that a lot of people in the party right now might feel like the change is going to happen overnight, but it won't. And, maybe you get recognized status and then the next election is opposition. And then after that, and they really do see Bonnie as that person. But, the Liberals have been through quite a few leaders in the last couple of rounds. And I feel like this is like a big existential moment for the party because Ontarians have put the Liberals in the penalty box for, 3 election cycles in a row now. And it's just fascinating to me because, they used to reign supreme in Ontario. It was either the Tories or the Liberals. And I do think that change elections are real, that it might not be the next term, but maybe after that, people will be fed up with Doug Ford and the Conservatives or whoever's leading the Conservative Party. And then it becomes, who's the alternative, the NDP or the Liberals. And I will just add really quickly, later this week, it'll run in QP Observer, but I talked to Rob Serjanik from Ajax, who managed to flip the seat. And I asked him, what's happening politically in Ajax that you managed to steal the seat from the Conservatives, who miraculously had 3, majority mandates in a row, which is obviously a rare feat. And he said that what he was hearing at the doors, at least in Ajax, is that people are really fed up with like the scandals, that he heard a lot about the Greenbelt. It's not necessarily the stuff that Doug Ford is talking about that seems to be winning him elections, like traffic, highways. He said he got a lot of laughs. Rob told me he got a lot of laughs about the tunnel under the 401. And so I think that's a tricky thing for any opposition leader right now to play against Doug Ford. But it's a trick of, condemning the current government and all of their scandals, and there's no shortage of them with this government, but it's also presenting yourself as like government in waiting. And I don't know if the NDP or the Liberals, or even the Greens for that matter, have been able to do that successfully. So I think for the Liberals in particular, this is an existential moment, whether or not it's through a leadership contest or, a policy convention or just,
Mhm.
uniting the party, which whoever is going to be leader is going to have to do. Yeah, you got your work cut out for you.
Well, and you bring up a lot of important points. That the idea that Doug Ford is unbeatable, I think, is a fallacy. You're right. There's been a slew of various scandals and mismanagement of public funds that I think, they defeated Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne over gas plant
Hmm.
uh, uh, locations, and we're talking, underground tunnels of highways and Highway 413s and Greenbelt and the Thermi Spa and all sorts of. There's no shortage of stuff that really should be government killers, in my opinion.
Right.
It's just a matter of like how do you use the weapon. The but as you said, you also brought up a good point of the Liberals need to be united going forward. I'm wondering, right now I'm seeing a lot of division. I think, I don't know how any party unites underneath one leader right now. I see a lot of that division happening, and I don't, the division I'm noticing, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is there seems to be a grassroots, not necessarily like a we want Nate, but there's a grassroots that just says we're seeing this stuff on the ground. We're seeing people are scared. They're worried about their livelihoods. They're worried about their jobs, their buying power, paying the mortgage, all that stuff. They're very worried. And the upper echelons of the party who are just focused on, like, I just want to talk about the scandals. And there seems to
Hmm.
be a disconnect. Like, people are like, yeah, we know Doug Ford has scandals, but I don't care about that because I'm too preoccupied with paying my mortgage or paying my rent this week or this month, I should say. What are you going to do to help me? And the party the upper tier of the party just doesn't seem to get that. I'm wondering, how does the party unite to have a message that resonates with Ontarians that says, I hear what you're saying, your concerns are my concerns. Send me to Queen's Park so I can put you at the decision making table.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick, right? That's
Yeah.
what's going to get you a seat at Queen's Park. I will say I think there was a lot to the snap election, the winter election. Not everyone's going to want to go out and vote. Those are just kind of you look at just the turnout numbers, like that
Mhm.
is just kind of your usual campaign challenges. But I think that this is a moment for the Liberals to really look at their platform. I know that, one of the pitches from Bonnie Crombie is to have a policy convention. I believe it's in 2027. I'll have to fact check myself on that. But to have like a serious policy discussion, I mean, I think that legalizing marijuana was like a huge thing for younger people, and it kind of helped Trudeau, bring the party from third to first. And so I'm not saying that, you need like one big bold proposal, like a tunnel under the 401, but I do think that they need to, for one, differentiate themselves enough from the NDP, and also to like to hear from regular people, like you said, about, what they need and uh how to help them with that. Because I think that a lot of people look at Doug Ford and think that he's for the people, that he's for the little guy, even though when you look a little closer at his record, it's not necessarily that that's the case. But it's not so much even of what you're saying on the platform, it's like how you're presenting it too. And so I think that's like the trick, that Doug Ford has this charisma that you really can't teach, um, that when people listen to him, they just believe that he's really going to help them and he's got it, he's in it for them. Whereas, policy wise, that's not really always the case.
Um, I just have one final thing to before we let you go, but this, I thought, my observation I thought was interesting is this time last year we were bombarded with Bonnie Crombie ads from the Ontario PC Party. They were like, you go online, you turn on the TV, you were bombarded with ads basically defining her as like a tax and spend liberal. I have not seen those ads, anything like no Ontario PC real literature commenting on her, and kind of wondering if, like, has the Ontario PC Party kind of looked at her and said, we've done our work here. We've branded her. We have defeated her. She is no longer a threat, and we are like, we don't worry about her anymore. We've defeated her. She's discredited. She is off the playing field. Is that politically something that, maybe on the Ontario political observers should be taking into account? Is that, the Tories are just kind of like, no, we're not worried about Bonnie Crombie anymore, and what that might say about Bonnie Crombie.
Well, yeah, I mean, she doesn't have a seat in the House. Doug Ford's not going to have to listen to her in question period. And I think there is some truth to that, and that maybe some liberals who are thinking about their leader are like, well, she's got too much baggage to overcome now. But at the same time, I think that she is a good fundraiser, and that she can bring in money for the party. And you need money to run ad campaigns. And obviously, the Conservatives have blown the other parties. Like, I look at their fundraising every quarter, they blow them out of the water. So they had a ton of cash to blow on these ads, and they were very effective in defining, Bonnie Crombie almost as she was just becoming leader and getting her feet wet. But again, I mean, I think voters can see through that for the most part, that if she did stick around, I don't think it's impossible for her to come back from that. She's just got to show people, right? And, she has the challenge of not having a seat in the House, but I will say she is a bit of a media darling that, when she's there in scrums after question period or holding a press conference, the whole press gallery is going to be there. They'll ask her questions. I know that, some of my colleagues, like the Star, might quote Bonnie Crombie's response to whatever Doug Ford is up to before they'll quote Marit Stiles. And so I do think that, like, in terms of coverage and headlines and, getting her face out there to voters and to people who really matter at the end of the day, that, she might have a challenge. But yeah, why not take advantage of the fact that maybe Doug Ford thinks, been there, done that. Let's, move on to Marit or Mike Schreiner. But I think that those ads were clear that they really saw Bonnie Crombie as the threat, and they wanted to take her out. And I think that, like, they were a huge part in keeping her from having a seat and also keeping the Liberals from performing better.
Well, this episode probably will air the week of the Ontario Liberal AGM. So I'm betting a number of Ontario Liberals are probably going to be listening to this on their way down to the AGM. I hope they are.
Call me if you got thoughts.
we shall see. I'll be curious to see what happens at this AGM. It's going to spark hopefully 4 years. So hopefully Doug Ford doesn't feel a need for another snap election before then.
Yeah, please, no.
But who knows? But we'll see how this guy. I think this is going to spark off another era of Ontario politics. All things considered. Sabrina, thank you very much for joining me. Always a pleasure, and we'll wait and see what happens next.
Yeah, can't wait to chat about it then.
I'm Jeff Woods, and I'm shining a light on music and the rock stars who make it.
He just was one of those people, he stood out.
He was a magic guy. He really was a magic guy. We all have faults. He had the same amount of faults as we all had.
This is before Led Zeppelin. Robert was full on. I mean, he was Led Zeppelin without the band behind him. He had the hair, the jeans, the whole thing, and he was amazing.
The Records and Rockstars podcast, heard around the world and yours to hear wherever you get podcasts. All the episodes from jeffwoodsradio.com.
Hi, I'm Marianne Weisenthal, host of the LifeSpeak podcast, a show where we dive into real conversations about mental health, resilience, and navigating life's everyday challenges. Each episode, I sit down with leading experts in health, work, and wellness to unpack big topics like burnout, parenting, leadership, anxiety, and personal growth. My guests share their own stories of struggle and resilience, and together we keep it honest, relatable, and practical. Whether you're looking for fresh perspectives or just a moment to feel seen and supported, you'll find it on the LifeSpeak podcast.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.